All right. Okay. Uh, Thank you. I think we're live. All right, we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Happy Sunday. Hope you're all doing well, and uh, and that everyone is happy, safe, and healthy wherever you are in the world today. And thank you so much for joining me in our live sacred space session for this month, November 2021. Okay, let me just make sure all the tech is working. Tech seems to be working. So I'll start by saying that, as always, I am honored to be with you in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. So the things we'll do in sacred space today, as usual, is uh, number one, we'll start by setting sacred space uh, and go through that little bit of a 7 or 8 minute process so we can settle fully into our sacred space. Then we'll have our kind of talk discussion topic for the week, for the month, excuse me. And for this month, our topic is returning to our original wounds. Returning to our original wounds. Then we'll have a bit of an exercise around that theme, and then we'll go ahead and close sacred space. So in starting to set sacred space for our session today, I will start by saying that what we would like to do here, our intention here is to create a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control in order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we define that. It could be a muse that we follow, or flashes of intuition, brilliant flashes of insight, uh, random interesting ideas and inspirations that come to us. Okay, a safe sanctuary space for us all to be able to relax and surrender with no feeling of danger or threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do every session, that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. Number one being confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules, right? What happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now, that's the rule for when we are in person, when sort of pandemic and global conditions allow. We're traveling all over the world, and we all get to sort of gather in person. Online, because the stream is public, the replay will be public. The way we handle confidentiality is via anonymization. And so if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous, but if you would like to be anonymous, the way you would do that is to come into the Crowdcast stream, and after you log in and everything, go into the edit profile feature and just change your username to Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, whatever you'd like, and then come back in and participate as normal. So confidentiality / anonymization is number one. Number two is that we try as much as possible to refrain from giving or creating any kind of feeling of threat. So no threat, no controlling, but also no fixing, no interventions, no curing, no tough love. Right now, there's nothing wrong with these, even especially as they may be well-intentioned, where you say, I'm just being tough for your own good. Right. So there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, but because that is of the provenance of fear, threat, and control, right? You better do this or else, that threat. It automatically pitches us back out of sacred space. Okay. And so we refrain from that in sacred space, not because it's bad, but because it is not of the nature of the space we're creating to get the things we need to do done, that you can only basically do in sacred space. Right. So for instance, if I'm going to the bank to conduct some business, going there, it's not a bar, we're not going to be drinking. It's not a dance party, we're not going to be dancing. There's nothing wrong with partying and dancing. But at the bank, we're there to do certain things that you can only get done at the bank. So we observe certain norms so that we can get our stuff done. And in exactly the same way in sacred space, We refrain from threat, control, fixing, tough love. We are here to hold space for each other, to be however we happen to be, right? The one place you can go where, however you are, no one's going to come in and try to sort of fix or adjust you, even for your own good. So if you find yourself afraid or anxious, we hold space for you to be afraid or anxious. If you find yourself happy and jubilant and relaxed, we hold space for you as you are. So at that level, and also however you feel about however you feel. So for instance, if you feel afraid and anxious, and you feel incompetent and like an nincompoop for being afraid and anxious, right? When everyone else is being brave, we hold space for that, right? We accept you as you are. If you're happy and relaxed, and you're guilty about being happy or relaxed, that's okay. We don't say, oh, you should enjoy your happiness. We just leave you as you are. We hold space for each other. The third principle, which is a corollary to the first two, is that there is no commerce. So in sacred space, nothing may be sold. I cannot sell you anything. Gowrie, my editor, who will be on screen in a moment, cannot sell you anything. Please refrain from selling stuff to each other in the chat. And that extends to recommendations as well. So if you're talking about some issue, and I say, well, there's this great book that you should read. Okay, and I don't know the author, I don't get any sort of benefit from recommending the book. Even that we refrain from. And the reason for that is any kind of marketing, any kind of recommendation, whether there's a financial arrangement or not, is however well-intentioned, is a kind of threat. You're in pain, aspirin, this acetaminophen, ibuprofen is the best thing for it. And the veiled sort of implicit threat is if you don't take my recommendation, you will continue to suffer and be in pain. Okay. Now, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with commerce or recommendations, but here we're trying to step away from as much fear, threat, and control as possible. So there's no commerce and there's no recommendations. We are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for the essence of what you are, not for what value you add or what you do or provide. Okay. And that's intrinsic to the nature of sacred space. Now, the fourth and final principle, another corollary to the above, is that there is no expectation of participation. So while you're here, there's no pressure to do anything, to chat or not chat, to stay the whole time or not stay the whole time, to watch the replay or not watch the replay, invite your friends or not invite your friends, ask questions, no questions. It doesn't matter. There's no pressure to do anything. Because again, the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. So if you want to listen on the replay while you're folding laundry or having lunch, that's not disrespectful. It doesn't matter. You do whatever you want, however you're comfortable, and we hold space for that, live or even in replay. So those are the four principles: confidentiality / anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, right? No commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. This is what I propose, and if you are not okay with that, we will. That's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control, expectation of participation to even come to sacred space in the first place. But we are about to enter into this communal space, okay? And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. We will just give you a moment now to draw from the group, make your selection. And we'll just catch up with you later. In profane space, we'll still be friends, we'll hang out still, etc. Okay. So we'll give you a moment to dial that in and make your selection. Okay. So now for the rest of us, as we so choose, we will now move together forward into our shared sacred space. And as we cross the threshold now into our shared sacred space, I will just remind all of you, including myself, to observe as much as possible the four principles: confidentiality / anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no controlling, no fixing, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right, welcome back to our sacred space. And I hope everyone is well. So our session topic for this session will be returning to our original wounds. This month's mythical brainstorm, so we do a call before each session with Gowrie, my editor, and myself. And Gowrie will select a story just from her muse. We'll read it. And typically the both of us at the end of the story will be like, I wonder why that came up. And then we start to go into it. And the theme then emerges from that. So this month's mythical brainstorm took us back to the image of the labyrinth from Greek mythology. The principle of circumambulation as the shape of healing, transformation, and life itself. And Gowrie will share links on talks in the past we've done exhaustively on the labyrinth, right? But here we have ourselves in this group circumambulated back to the image of the labyrinth. And as we went into it, we realized that, now as we continue to attempt to emerge yet again, like the fourth or fifth round of trying to re-emerge from the pandemic and lockdown, areas of healing we had maybe confronted during lockdown and even before lockdown are now returning to us for their next rounds of deepening and healing. And this is part of the human process, right? Things that came to you, that wounded you, you finally took the bull by the horns and really sort of healed it. And we use the word healing here, not curing, right? You felt like you healed it, and then weeks go by, months go by, years go by, and the issue comes up again, right? And you say, as we all do, oh my gosh, I thought we dealt with this. I thought that was over. I thought we were able to move on and progress and go forward, all of these linear terms. And now we find that we're circumambulating, nonlinear, back to this thing that we thought we had conquered, right? So our inner critic may call this circumambulation going in circles. You're just going in circles, right? You haven't made any progress, you fool. But if you look more closely, if you step back and hold space for the fact that the same issue is coming around again, you will notice that it is circular, but it's not actually a circle. It is actually a spiral, where each round takes us deeper and deeper into essentially what is the true core of our inner selves. And as we've said before, this true core is where the wound is, and it is also where the source of our bliss and meaning in life will be found as well. Right, the classical saying, from our deepest wounds come our greatest gifts to the world, touches the jugular of this phenomenon in being a human being. So the story Gowrie selected that brought us to this place was the story of Daedalus. Daedalus, the Greek tradition, the original architect of the labyrinth on Crete. And this brought us into even deeper insight into the circumambulation of parts of ourselves that we exile, in this case, multiple rounds of exiling our inner masculine. And how our original wounds come back to us again and again in ever deeper layers of healing. So that's the topic for today. And next we'll dive into the story. And for that, I will invite Gowrie on screen, if you're there. Hello.
Hi, Artie. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that's great.
Perfect video and sound. Thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be back.
Good to have you back. So will you tell us about the story you selected and maybe a bit of background on how it came to you?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we're going back to the labyrinth, but that's not how I saw it when I first selected the story. It was when I was thinking about what was the next thing to do. Somehow I felt like it's time to talk about circumambulation and the labyrinth again, because it's been a while since we started this journey in Life Sacred Space. And we've talked extensively about the labyrinth, about circumambulation, about the shape of healing. But it feels like, with the pandemic and the situations around it entering a kind of a new phase, I dare not say that it's over, but it feels like it's entering a new phase. So with all of that, I felt like somehow that's the reflection that we're leading into. And I thought, what more could we talk about the labyrinth?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we've been talking about it all the time. What can I say? Something that's new and something that we've not covered before. Although I don't really see if that's really the aim every Sacred Space session. And then I realized that we haven't spoken about Daedalus, who is the original architect of the labyrinth that we keep talking about. And I thought it would be interesting just to kind of go to his life and see what inspired him. And at that time, I thought it would be about, the muse or the artist or the architect, kind of an archetype. But it turned out that it was about the labyrinth again. So I felt like it all connected together to the insight that I had. I think it's time for us to kind of revisit the concept of the labyrinth. So that's how it came about. Yeah.
Thank you for leading us here.
Thank you. And do you want me to tell the story?
Yes, please. Thank you.
It's I don't know. It's less a story and more like a bio. That's
a bio is a story.
Bio is a story. So we're talking about Daedalus, who in Greek myth and in Greek literature is considered one of the greatest inventors, architects, sculptors, and an overall genius. And there are stories about how Daedalus was originally from Athens and was born in a lineage that was sort of blessed by Athena herself. And therefore he had these skills that were beyond normal, right? They were considered genius. So he had a career as an architect and a sculptor of very high reputation while he was in Athens. And he had, of course, pupils under his wing that he would train. And one of them was his own nephew, his sister's son, called Daedalus. And it so happened, possibly because he was related to Daedalus, that Daedalus was supremely talented as a sculptor, or as an architect, as an inventor himself. And the story is that when Daedalus was walking around one day and he saw, the skeleton of a snake, and he saw the jaw of a snake, and he had this idea of making, of shaping iron into this kind of similar to a snake's jaw and have these spiked, sharp edges to it. And that's how the saw came into existence. He invented the saw, inspired by what he saw as the jaw of a snake. And apparently he also invented the compass. And so, this was a young boy who hadn't even, come of age or come into his own as an architect. And he was already inventing new things that were never heard of before. And he was a budding genius. And surprisingly or not surprisingly, whichever way we look at it, Daedalus was jealous. He thought that if this boy grew up and became a sculptor and an architect, he would surpass my fame and I would lose the reputation that I have. And so in a fit of jealousy, he killed Daedalus. He threw the boy off, a building. And unfortunately for him, there were witnesses. He was caught in that act. And as punishment, he was banished from Athens. And so he then moves to Crete, and this is the phase of his life that he's most famous for. Because in Crete, he started to work for King Minos. And King Minos then commissioned him to work on various projects. And one of them was to build the labyrinth, the famed labyrinth, that once you enter, you cannot get out. Right? So this was the labyrinth that King Minos wanted to imprison the Minotaur. We've done this story, so I won't go too much into the details of this, and I'll share a link later if you'd like to revisit the story and kind of, watch the whole thing. So, when King Minos wanted to imprison Minotaur, he made Daedalus build the labyrinth for him. And then this labyrinth becomes the center stage of many, many stories from there. Not just the story of the Minotaur, but also the story of Theseus. As Theseus comes in, volunteering himself, as an offering to the Minotaur, just so that he could slay the beast and end the whole ritual of offering young women and young men to this beast every 9 years. So then we have the whole story of Theseus come in, right? And the way Theseus was able to get himself out of the labyrinth was because Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos, who fell in love with Theseus, told him the secret. And she found out the whole solution to this by going to Daedalus and asking him what the solution was and how to get out of the labyrinth. So Daedalus told her. And he had to pay for it, because when King Minos found out, he was furious. And so he decided, once Theseus escaped, he decided to punish Daedalus by, imprisoning him in the same place in the labyrinth. And then, Daedalus had to spend his time there. And now the story, there are versions which say that he managed to escape out of the labyrinth, but he couldn't get himself out of Crete. Right, so Crete itself was like a prison for him, because the only way to escape out of Crete is by the sea, right? And Minos would watch every ship that comes in and out. So there was no way he could escape from Crete. And so he, and all of this while Daedalus spent time in Crete, he also had a son of his own with a slave maiden, and the son's name was Icarus. And when Daedalus was imprisoned in the labyrinth, Icarus was with him. So when they got out, Daedalus had to think of a way where he would escape Crete as well as, with his son. And how would he do that? And so this is where, Daedalus's inventive mind comes into play. He decides that he can't leave, via the sea route. So the only way for him to leave was by air. And he started to fashion wings for himself and his son. He even taught his son how to build those wings. He started to collect feathers of various sizes. And then one by one, he started to place the feathers like they were placed in a bird's wings, with the help of wax. Right? And finally, when the wings were ready, he tied them up and put them on himself and his son. So there were two wings. And then he could take off into the sky. And that was his escape route. And before leaving, he told Icarus that he had to be very, very careful while flying, because if he went too high into the sky, there was this serious risk of air getting too warm and the wax melting. And if he went too low, all the moisture and the humidity from the sea would kind of make the wings soggy and weigh down, and he would fall. So the trick was, Daedalus said, you have to stay in the middle. You have to make sure you stay in the middle all the time. And for quite a distance, Daedalus held Icarus's hand and carried him in the air until he made sure that he could fly. Right? And after a while, Daedalus kept flying ahead towards the coast, towards the mainland. And Icarus kept following him. But the joy of flying was just so high that Icarus just forgot himself after a while. He kept flying higher and higher and higher until he suddenly realized, this all happened so fast. The wax melted because the air got too hot, and then the wings just disengaged, just fell off from him. And by the time Icarus realized that, he was already down into the sea. And Daedalus was flying ahead. Every few minutes would turn around to see Icarus was still following him. When he turned around and he couldn't see him anywhere. And the only time he realized was when he looked down and saw two wings floating on the sea. And this was just absolutely heart-wrenching. And Daedalus just plunged down to see if he could find his son's body, and he couldn't. And he kept flying because, he had to continue. So he flew until he reached Sicily. And he landed on the island of Sicily. And he mourned for his son, whose body he couldn't find. And then as soon as he landed, he went into Sicily and he built a temple dedicated to the god Apollo. And then in this temple, he took off his wings, placed them there as an offering. And that was the last time he would fly. Right? And so he stayed there until he grew old. He offered his services to the king of Sicily. And apparently there's even a story that King Minos heard of all the wonderful things that were being built in Sicily and immediately knew that this must be Daedalus. So he sent for him and sent a word to the king of Sicily that I would want Daedalus back because, he's my prisoner. And the king of Sicily, agreed, seemingly agreed, but he didn't want to let go of this absolute genius. So he welcomed King Minos into Sicily, and he said, "Oh, of course, you can take your prisoner back." And sort of hosted him to a wonderful meal, and sent him to rest in the palace. And while he was bathing, got him killed because he didn't want to let go of Daedalus. And so Daedalus stayed back in Sicily until old age, and then, apparently he died in Sicily. So that's the story. So, Artie, would you like to come back? Because I've added a few things that I hadn't discussed with you in the story before. And I realized that, it's just going around the story felt so much.
Oh, you cut out a bit. Hello?
There's so much more.
Oh,
yeah.
Can you say
Sorry,
that again?
can you hear me
just
now?
Cut out a little bit. Yeah.
Right. So I was saying that just telling the story of Daedalus feels like circumambulating because there's so much movement to the story, almost literally.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that so much. So I can hear you, but I can't see you. But I think that's That may just be me. Are you there?
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, I'm here. I think it could be my signal. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. So let me ask the question I usually ask. First of all, thank you for telling the story again. I think for me, that was a fitting demonstration of circumambulation in action. Because as we always say, there is this sort of narrative part of circumambulation where, there you are, okay, where you tell the story again and again, and each time you tell it, it changes a little bit. And that is part of the value, right? And we'll talk about that dynamic. But for now, let me ask my usual question, which is, and your answer may be different from the last time I asked this. Where do you enter into the story now?
Yeah, like you said, I don't remember what I said the last time you asked me this. But to me, it's fascinating that, you know, that Daedalus built this amazing labyrinth. And for a short time, he had to be imprisoned in it himself. He had to go into it himself. I mean, this is the architect of the labyrinth we're talking about, right? And I mean, he could probably see the map and the overview of the whole thing. He knew it, and yet he had to spend time in it. So that's what's really fascinating to me.
Well, he couldn't even, strictly speaking, escape it.
Yeah.
But for the gambit of the wax and feather wings.
Yes.
Interesting. What I love about this story and the fact that you brought it back is that all of these stories, right, constitute this like complicated, almost like Celtic knot, right? This labyrinth. And I'll just put up the image of the labyrinth I usually use, right? It is this entwined thing. And in past talks, when I talk about the labyrinth, you know, there are parallels with, you know, basically spiders' webs. Ariadne is close to Arachne, right? Sort of phonetically. And the story of Arachne, how she was a maiden, she was a master weaver of these webs. When you see a spider, it is a symbol of the power of narrative in your life, right? And it's something, you know, so if you see a spider in your home, please don't kill it. Please sort of trap it and bring it outside. But it's this complicated, right, entanglement of multiple stories. So this story, like Arius brought us, is the story of Daedalus, right? But he weaves into the story of Minos, which then weaves into the story of Poseidon, right, and Pasiphae, his wife, Minos's wife, which we can get into in a little bit, and then that whole story of how the Minotaur came to be born through the failures of Minos and his disrespect to Poseidon, weaves into the classical story of Theseus and Ariadne, and then weaves back into Daedalus and Icarus, right? Now, many of these stories, some of them are more obscure, some of them are more well-known. So Minos and the Minotaur is more well-known. Theseus and Ariadne is more well-known. Daedalus and Icarus is more well-known. And typically when we learn these stories as school children, right, they are taught allegorically. So if you read these stories allegorically, each one as separate, right? The moral of a story is what Icarus should have listened to his father and not gone too far up and gone down the middle. Minos should not have insulted Poseidon, right? When Poseidon gave him this fabulous, perfect white bull, and then expected Minos to sort of sacrifice the bull back to Poseidon in this kind of ongoing cyclical reciprocal congress between the best of the mortals and the gods, right? Minos, of course, refused. And what Poseidon did was he struck his wife, Pasiphae, daughter of Helios, sister of Circe from the Odyssey, for those of you who are nerds about this and into this. And she was struck with this uncontrollable madness and lust for the white bull. This was Poseidon's punishment. And what she then did was she went to Daedalus as the queen, right, of Crete, and said, "You will build me a false cow that the bull will be sexually sort of attracted to. And within this cow, I will hide, right? So that when the bull takes the cow, it will be taking me, and thereby her sort of divinely induced lust and madness will be satisfied." So of course he has to do what she says. So he builds it. Another one of his perfect magical divine crafts, right? Like the labyrinth, like the wings. And she uses it, and then she becomes pregnant by the bull, and she gives birth to the Minotaur, which is half human, half bull. Minos then is horrified by this and has Daedalus build the labyrinth itself to, for those of you who do healing, right, stuff down this part of him, right, that has literally been born from his own conflict with the gods and his own sort of hubris. And it's shameful. It is his own son, so he can't like kill it, right, necessarily. So he entraps it in the labyrinth, right? This is the classic, the Minotaur is this classic symbol in the Greek tradition of the lost board member stuffing down, hiding it, hiding your shame, etc., etc. But we read it, allegorically as like Minos shouldn't have done that, Pasiphae shouldn't have done that, and now we have this disaster with the Minotaur. Theseus, right, went in, got help from Ariadne with the golden ball of thread, and then he betrayed her, and then he got punished as well. So Theseus shouldn't have betrayed Ariadne. Minos shouldn't have insulted Poseidon. Icarus should have listened to his father. So when you read these stories through the allegorical lens, it's all fear, threat, and control. You shouldn't have done this. You should have been a good person. You should have been honest, etc., etc. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with allegory. There's nothing wrong with enforcement of law and order, sort of social enforcements of rules that sort of keep the social order stable, right? In other words, there's nothing wrong when I stop at a red light while I'm driving my car, feeling fear, threat, or control of like, okay, I better stop at the red light, or else if I run it, everyone's going to honk me, the police are going to catch me, and I'm going to get a ticket. Okay, that's fear, threat, and control. That's life in the profane. But in that instance with the red light, there's nothing wrong with that, right? So there is a place for fear, threat, and control. And when you read these stories through the lens of fear, threat, and control, you get the school child lessons, right, to keep you in line. But then if you read them through a different lens, through what we call a mythopoetic lens, the number one rule of reading something mythopoetically is that you regard every major actor in the story or collection of stories, intertwined stories, as being a symbol of a different part of your own inner self. And here we have a mad tangle of stories. So I'm going to try to talk fast, even though we have over an hour left, because there's a lot to unpack here, right? So in other words, when you read these stories mythopoetically, Daedalus and Icarus are both parts of you. The Minotaur is a part of you. The Labyrinth is a part of you, right? The sort of the ball of golden thread that Ariadne gives to Theseus to find his way out of the labyrinth, which was the secret that Daedalus shared with her, is a part of you. The wings are part of you, right? Minos, the white bull, Pasiphae are all parts of you, okay? Now, we're not going to unpack all of that in one session, but the thing The way to untangle all of this then is you put on your lens of like, yeah, these are all different parts of my own inner self. And then you hit the play button on the story, you let the story unravel, right? And spool out, and you take notes on who's doing what to whom, what's going on, right? And one of the things you look for is at the end of the story versus the beginning of the story, what has changed? What has changed? Is it a good change? Is it a bad change? And if it's a good change, you look at what happened in between. That will give you some clue as to how you get to this better state. And if it's a bad change, it will give you clues, not as punishments, but just as symbols, dioramas of the physics of human life and humanity. So the beauty of the Greek myths, the reason we keep coming back to these, is that they are so filled with divine power, really, and inexhaustible, right? You take just one image, a tree, the tree of life, a well, right? A cave with a dragon in it, or the labyrinth with a minotaur at the center of it. You can talk about just the one image forever, right? And when you combine these images into this dynamic thing on a larger canvas, right? When you see the gods at work, I mean, the Iliad, right? The Odyssey are these like master works of, they're just miracles of existence that they even exist and that they've survived. All of these stories weaving into each other, they become this massively inexhaustible source of mythopoetic insight and power. For those of you who have been tracking the last several sessions, these stories themselves become these golden apples, right? Where you feast on this inexhaustible golden apple that gives you the wisdom of nourishing insight. And these are the things that distinguish the gods from mortals, right? So you eat these open golden apples and you become as gods, right? So that's the power of mythopoetics. That's the power of mythopoetics. So we can talk every week on just this set of stories, and it will go on forever. We won't do that. We'll jump around, right? Because we're following the muse. We're following the golden thread laid out by the muse. But this month, she's taken us past this township cluster of stories that themselves constitute their own kind of mythopoetic labyrinth. Okay. So anyway, very exciting, very huge, inexhaustible. So what will we do in the rest of our time? There was this one particular angle that I wanted to focus on this time around when we were kind of exploring this cluster of stories. And that is through the angle of looking at the inner masculine, right? So the way I sort of stepped into the story with Gary this time is in terms of the different phases of the inner masculine. Now, we've talked in past sessions what we mean by inner masculine and inner feminine. I'll just give a quick sort of thumbnail reminder, especially for those of you who may be new. The general idea is that we all have, regardless of our external kind of claim stated gender, we all have inner masculine and inner feminine within us, right? The core functions of the feminine, the major functions of the feminine are nourishment / nurturing and vision. You know, feminine is the holder of vision. The main functions of the masculine, the way we teach it, are protection, boundary control, right? This is mine, that's yours. Let's like keep a clean fence between us. And number two is manifestation, right? So the inner feminine downloads the vision from the divine and then calls in the inner masculine, hands him the blueprints, and he actually makes it happen. So he sets the boundary, and when we need to aggress beyond our boundary to collect more resources to make our vision happen, that's the role of the masculine. So regardless of your outer gender, as a human, you have both. Now, if you are, I mean, and the combinations are endless, but let's just take the classic example of like, if you are a woman in a patriarchy, right, which we are in, the world sees you primarily as feminine. And in the patriarchy, we squash down the feminine. So one of the oldest tricks in the book, right, to sort of take power away from something in a patriarchy, where the masculine principle has more power, is to tell, the one way to disenfranchise you is to tell you have no masculine, right? Girls don't play with guns, girls don't fight, girls don't wrestle, they don't cuss, they don't spit, right? They don't do nasty things. Otherwise, we'll call you a nasty woman, right? And to convince you that you have no masculine, i.e., you have no powers of boundary, you can't say no, and you have no powers of manifestation. You can't get anything done by yourself without the assistance of a good man, right? So that's just one small classic, unfortunately, all too common example. But regardless of all that, the reality is we all have inner masculine and feminine within us. So today in this story, we are talking about the dynamics of the transformation of the inner masculine. Okay. Because when we zoom in to what happens to the different masculines here, right, in this story, what happens? So there are three emerging masculines that are lost over the course of this story, as Gowrie has told it. There's a kind of wounding pattern that happens again and again and again, over and over, circumambulating over the same damn wound over and over again. Right? It's like two brothers, where, like in the Marvel universe, right, where Loki is always duping Thor, right? And whenever he dupes Thor again, he's like, brother, will you ever not fall for that, right? Old trick that I pull on you, right? So circumambulating on these wounds over and over again. And when I say emerging inner masculine, so when you see babies and children in dreams, they are symbols of the emerging part of, emerging version of that part of you. Right, so if you see your father, he's a symbol of your inner authority, inner masculine. If you see your son or your baby boy, or a puppy, right, or a pup wolf, a baby lion, that is a symbol of the emerging version 2.0 edition of the inner masculine. Right, often you'll see an old grandfather that passes away in a dream, and then you'll look for, in the next dream, for a baby. Now it's the return of the masculine in its emerging form. So here there are three emerging masculines that are stuffed down and lost. Okay, who are the three who are lost? The first is Telos, the nephew of Daedalus, where Daedalus literally throws him off a cliff and kills him. How's that for suppression? He doesn't even hide him in the labyrinth. He just outright kills him, right? The second, on the other end of the story, is Icarus, of course, right? Literally the son of Daedalus, the emerging inner masculine. And we lose Icarus not because he's thrown off a cliff, but he does sort of basically drown in the waters through his own hubris, but also empowered and enabled by his father, right, who gave him these wings, right? And then the third sort of lost emerging inner masculine, right? What's the other son in this? So there's Talos, the nephew, there's Icarus, the son. The third is, of course, the Minotaur, right? And we don't think of the Minotaur as a son of Minos. We're just like, oh, it's just this bastard, horrible sort of monster. But he is the son of the king, right? We choose not to think about that. I mean, these parts of ourselves that we stuff down, we're just like, yeah, that's not a thing. That's just a whatever, right? And the Minotaur, whose actual name is Asterion, and we've talked about this in the Labyrinth session from before, which is the clue to everything, right? So the Minotaur, the lowest, the most shameful, the most horrifying part of you, his name is actually Asterion, which means, of course, star, right? Which is the clue that shows you that the deepest, most shameful part of you that you stuff down is not actually equal with all the other parts of you, but is actually the highest. It is the star. Your greatest flaw is actually your greatest strength and virtue in hidden form. And if you're sitting there thinking about this, going like, no, that's completely ridiculous. That is the natural reaction, right? It takes time to go into the labyrinth to like actually discover this. And the whole time you're like shaking with terror because everyone tells you not to go in there and look for that part of yourself, right? How many times have your parents say, oh, Artie, that's not you. That's not you. It's like, what do you mean that's not me? I just did it, so it must be me. Nobody else did it other than me. And what they really mean to say is, that's not the you that we approve of. That is you, but we expect you to stuff that part of you down. And one of the key choice points in life, crossroads in life, is what you do when you realize you are faced with that choice. Do you accept and conform? Do you rebel? Or do you do something in between? Okay. Now, Talos. So let's touch on each of these really quickly. Talos is an emerging masculine, right, to Daedalus. And the way we read this time, at least, and again, in circumambulation, we come back in a year from now, we may read it differently. But the reflection it brought forward in us when we were reading this together was that this Talos is unacceptable because it will make Daedalus lose prestige. And in order to retain his prestige, he stuffs down this emerging, perhaps even more talented part of your own inner talent, but which may make you lose prestige in the way that you've been accustomed to receiving prestige and earning prestige. And you see real life cases of this all the time. I was brainstorming with Gary. I was like, yeah, this happened to me as well. Right? In a previous life, I was well known for being a tech startup person, founder of like two sort of venture-backed companies, Stanford, Harvard, blah, 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 blah. Right? So that's my Daedalus at that time of my life. I also, sort of unbeknownst to me, right? I've always been like the advisor friend that everyone in my circles like comes to, even friend of a friend. I don't even know them; they're just recommended. And I go for a long walk around the lake with them, and at the end of it, somehow their problem is like solved, right? I don't even know why, but people come to me for advice. So I have this gift of healing and advising. And I can tell you, when I was a tech CEO, even when it came up, I would stuff it down. Why is that? Because as the Daedalus of tech, if I let this healing art come out, I would lose prestige in the tech world. Right? It's like, are you a therapist now? What is this? Right? Oh, you're doing like healing. Oh, okay. Is this a startup? Is this a meditation app? Like, how do we make money? How do we put a harness on this and a collar and whip it to make us money and prestige in the tech world? And I was like, I would never do that. So I would never let it out in that world. So I stuffed it down. I threw it off a rock. And when I do that, I exile this part of myself, which means I exile myself. You can't exile your liver without exiling yourself. And the result back then was I was still in tech, but I couldn't wake up in the morning. I had to drag myself out of bed. I get exiled to Crete. And to sort of switch traditions here, in the Celtic, Arthurian, Holy Grail quest, Knights of the Round Table tradition of the Fisher King, right? The two key lines of that sacred text. I'm at the feast. I have access to everything in tech. Everything I eat, the food turns to ash when it enters my mouth. And I'm maimed. I have no procreativity. I have no creativity. And the line from that second line from the Fisher. So the first line is everything turns to ash in the mouth. And the second line, when we teach it, that we focus on, is that I'm maimed. I'm in agonizing pain, even though I'm the king of everything. Right? And the line is that the king, me in this case, was too ill to live and yet unable to die. Right? If there were ever a phrase to me that touches the jugular of midlife crisis / midlife initiation, it is this phrase of he or she was too ill to live fully and yet unable to die. So this is Talos, just Talos, right off the starting blocks, right? He exiles in a masculine. And then he's on Crete, working for Minos. And he does it again. So he's already in exile, and he exiles down to the next level. What is the exile that happens on Crete, right? The exiled part is the Minotaur. Now, you're like, well, Minos is the one who ordered Daedalus, but Daedalus complied. Because Minos is a part of you too. Right? So King Minos, Daedalus, Talus, Asterion, Icarus, these are all different aspects of the same inner masculine within you. It is your own inner masculine fighting itself, writhing in agony, trying to figure out which part is going to come forward into the world. Right? It's like a knife fight in a phone booth. And Daedalus, the one in power, the one with all the talent for now, because he killed the other part, comes onto Crete and serves what? Right, the hubristic evil king. And what does the evil king want him to do? The same damn thing he did that got him into this mess in the first place. Where it's like, oh, I'm stressed. I don't like my life. I can't get out of bed. How will I fix this? Oh, I'll take the next job and get even more money and prestige because that worked so well the last time. We're going to do it again. We're going to do it again with even more gusto, right? So he helps this even more powerful inner masculine aspect stuff down even harder and even scarier and ugly and terrifying, shameful part. It's not just some nephew trying to show you up. This is like the personification of your shame. Brought on by yourself because you were not in harmony with the divine, with Poseidon. Right? He gives you this gift of the perfect white bull. It's like getting talent. You're just talented. You're born, like making music, singing, being good at math. You take the bull, and you're supposed to take the bull and sacrifice it back to the gods. I'm supposed to take my gift, right, and spread it out for the world in honor of the muse and the gods. That's why I was given the gift in the first place, right? You're not supposed to take the gift and like use it for like to show everyone how great this bull is that I have it and how lucky I am, right? It's like you misused the gift. You got the gift, good for you, but that is not how you use it. And as a result, you have this shameful thing that comes out called the Minotaur as a mark of your error. And then you take this mark of error and then you hella stuff it down. Okay. And the Daedalus part of you helps you do it. And you're like, well, he's a slave. He doesn't have any choice. You always have a choice. You can throw yourself off the cliff. I mean, don't do that, right? But mythopoetically, metaphorically speaking, you always have a choice, right? And by the way, right, Daedalus helped Pasiphae build her cow to enable, right, the sort of wrath of Poseidon, right? So it was the pride of Minos that broke the order of everything. Poseidon punishing Minos is kind of another ancillary symbol of this sign of suppression too. So what's beautiful here about this story is that the second go around of the stuffing down of this lost part of you literally happens in the archetype of the labyrinth itself. Right, so how does Daedalus stuff down the Minotaur? He builds, I kid you not, the actual labyrinth. Right? He is the enabler. Talent, craft, artisanal, divine sort of genius used for this kind of purpose, right? So Daedalus himself is like wasting his own white bull on doing this kind of thing. Okay, so he stuffed down Talos, threw him off a rock. In exile, he does it again. He goes one level even deeper. Okay, and then he goes even deeper to the next level where he loses his own actual son, Icarus. Again, with the power of his craft, deeply entangled in it. Okay. So in multiple cycles of circumambulation, the idea here is that, as with this image, you go in. So this is I've said this in the other talk, but This form of labyrinth is what they call the Chart style labyrinth. It's an 11 circuit. At some point, maybe I'll do a workshop on how to draw your own labyrinth, how to build your own labyrinth for your own sort of insight and reflection purposes. So here, right, you're circumambulating around a course. So this is a labyrinth, by the way, not a maze. A maze has dead ends. A labyrinth is a single track in and a single track out. You cannot get lost. Your only choices in a labyrinth are basically whether to enter. Sort of a choice. And once you're in, it's just, do you keep moving forward or not? So you walk around a core center here. You gradually get closer, right? But at any moment, you may be like doing hairpin turns back and forth. You may feel like these are 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. But even though you make this turn here, right, you are eventually going this path where you end up in the center. Right, so at any given moment, you may literally physically be going further from it, but in the larger picture, you are getting closer. Right, it's like the old saying, all who wander are not lost. You may think you are lost, right? But I would say that all who wander are never lost, right? Because this is not a path in some state park you can go to or church, right? This is a symbol of the shape of your life, right? And then that's the question is, what is in the center? And in this case, what is in the center is our Minotaur. And we need to go in and do something with it, engage it, rescue it, kill it / transform it, and then it takes another form. But you're not going to just stuff it down and go about your business, right? That's the path of the zombie, the undead, right? Too ill to live and yet unable to die. So anyway, that's why we take the labyrinth as the symbol of circumambulation. When we do retreats and we actually draw, I teach a different style of labyrinth, like actually they call it the Cretan labyrinth, this style of labyrinth, the classical labyrinth. We will draw it on the beach, in the sand, or in the desert, right? And you can enter with a question. And as you reach the center, you may have an answer to the question you're going with, or you may end up with a completely different question, a completely different state of mind. And then from the center belly of the beast, you come back out. And so the idea here is that in a person's life, circumambulation will often revolve also around narrative, right? Which is why spiders, as we said earlier, Arachne was the name of a Greek maiden who was a weaver before she was turned into a spider by Athena. And I won't go into that story. But spiders are symbols of spinning narrative, spinning yarns to trap and catch and enthrall you with it. And so when we talk about spinning the web of the labyrinth and traveling the labyrinth of your life, but what is the currency of doing this, right? The currency is not just like traveling to a different state or, it's not physical or geographical. It is narrative, right? The labyrinth of our lives is around narrative where something happens to us, right? Good or bad, right? And the crux of everything that event will do to you depends basically 1000% on the quality and tenor and timbre of the narrative that emerges from it. And this is the thing we're circumambulating and polishing and going over and over and over again in the labyrinth. So for example, say something happens to you, good or bad, right? Let's say you have a breakup, right? Breakup, you expected it was a long time coming, or it was a shock, whatever. Right after the breakup, what do? What does anyone do? You go to friends, you go to family, you go to a priest, a therapist, and what do you do when you reach them? You tell the story, the narrative of what happened. Oh, we broke up. And then the first round of circumambulation is pretty basic. Whose fault was it? I can't believe he did that to me, that bastard, right? Who said what? Who did what to whom, right? And then after you tell it, what do? Much to the grief of your friends or your therapist or your priest, you tell the whole story again. And then you tell it again. After a while, your friends are like, "Oh, I can't hear this. I can't. All she talks about is this breakup. Right? I want to like strangle myself. I can't. I can't." Everyone starts avoiding you because you just keep telling the same damn story again and again. But what you're doing when you repeat it, if you notice, is every time you tell it again, some detail, some skew, some tilt of the story is a little bit different. And what you are doing when you tell these stories again and again is, even to yourself, you're lying awake at night, 3 a.m., and you're thinking over and over again, every little detail that happened over and over again. You can't sleep. Right? Do you stuff it down? You take a pill and knock yourself out? I mean, if you have to get a night or two to catch up, fine. But that process is natural. It is circumambulation. Right? The first couple rounds of the story, let's take this breakup example and bring it forward. He broke up with me, that bastard. A few months later, right, you're still telling a story. Something else has slipped in. Where it's like, yeah, he's still a jerk, but something about me starts to slip in. Right? When you circumambulate about a breakup, it matures, it seasons, right? It ripens somehow. Or by the end of it, yeah, I would never date someone like that again, but it wasn't just him, it was me too. Like I was like this, and I realized, yeah, he did this and it was wrong and everything, but the partner before that had a similar pattern. And the partner before that had a similar pattern, right? And maybe the narrative takes a turn. So all men are like jerks, right? Or it's like, yeah, I mean, maybe, but it's like, there is one commonality across these 3 or 4 people, and that commonality is me. And what is my role in all of this, right? Because he may be a jerk, but I chose him, right? Why did I choose him, and this guy, right? It's just a question, right? And so the point is, you tell the story a bazillion times. It's not a circle; it's a spiral. Every time you tell it, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. It is circumambulatory. It is not linear. You don't get to that point in the narrative from A to B. You retell and retell and retell, and you're polishing the stone to a mirror, brilliant finish. Right? With friends, you say, I know I've said this a million times, I should stop. And close friends who understand what's going on will be like, that's okay, you've said it a million times. Say it again. Tell the story again. Right? And they hold space for you. They don't try to fix, they just hold space for you. They let you tell again. The one doing the healing when I hold space for you is not me, it's you. Right? I'm the assistant. I'm holding the container so you don't spill out all over the place. Right? But the healing action is you telling the story for the millionth and first time. And then you get the insight. Right? So anyway, that's why I do it only with close friends, because it's a lot of work. It doesn't seem like you're doing a lot just sitting there, but it is a lot of work to actually hold space for someone and not, to resist the impulse, the very natural human impulse to get in there and start fixing stuff so we can move on, right? And so the labyrinth is this visceral, archetypal, beautiful reminder of the inherent pattern of life. Narrative, healing is a spiral. You go over the same damn thing again and again. Nature itself presents in spirals, not in straight lines, not in linear angles, right? A spider web, an acorn, a pine cone, a seashell, a galaxy, all present in spirals. The narrative of your life presents in a spiral. So what is the spiral that's repeating here in the Daedalus story? Right? So the whole thing is a tangled web to begin with, one story flowing into another. This is the nature of spider webs and spirals. And the story begins with Daedalus suppressing and emerging inner masculine. Minos then suppresses Asterion. Daedalus helps him do it. Theseus then goes in, suppresses Minotaur even more, transforms him, and then veers off into his own transformation path. A kind of orthogonal sort of vectoring off of that. And he has his own issue with his inner mask, because Theseus leaves, he betrays Ariadne, and then Theseus's father dies because of a failure of communication with raising the correct sailor. Right. All of which can be read mythopoetically. Then, right, the third transformation, we lose Icarus, who is talented, like Talos, right? And who is not the proper template, like Minotaur. Icarus is born in captivity. He is a slave child, right? And we don't care. We like Icarus. We're taking him with us to get the hell off the island, right? But then we lose Icarus through, just to save time, I'm going to use a term from Psych. We use Icarus through inflation, right? Icarus gets too big for his britches. In spiritual terms, you do all the healing, you do all the work, you do all the programs, you get back your lost board member. You're like, I'm not like that idiot Minos. And I got back my Minotaur and I realized he's a Asterion. And now I've found my bliss and my life is great. And then you say, so that's all fine. But then you fly a little bit too high. And you say, woohoo, I'm done. I'm done. I'm cured. I'm more elevated and I have a higher vibration than you other fools, right? Which is inflation. Which also, again, this is not a allegorical thing like, so you better not be inflated, you better not get too big. It is a symbol. It is mythopoetic, which says after Talos, after Asterion, we have Icarus. So it's like, you will do all these things. And then after you escape, or think you have escaped, you will overinflate. It's not a flaw. It's not a you dumb slob. It's like, this is the pattern of the spiral. And you will inflate. And then you will come back down to earth. Okay. Now, the physics of inflation, just really quickly. There's nothing wrong with you acknowledging that you've come a long way. I've done a lot of work. I've done, I've faced my demons, But at that point, it forks in two different directions. And what I refer to them is inflation versus grandiosity. Now, they're both tend to be negatively inflected in our modern society. But the distinction I draw is inflation is, I have done it. I am the greatest. You are all below me. Okay. Grandiosity, as opposed to inflation, is I have gone through all this. Circumambulation, the Minos thing, the Talos thing. I have some insights. And now I'm overwhelmed because it's like, I realize I have insights that other people don't have. It doesn't make me better, but it's like, I have this payload. I have this white bull that I've been given by Poseidon. And inflation says, I'm the greatest. Look at the white bull I have. And grandiosity says, like, so I know I need to sacrifice this back to the god. How do I do that? Right? Do I share the benefit of my insights as Daedalus with the world? Well, there's no internet back then. How am I going to do that? Right? So inflation is like narcissistic, if you want to use that word. Grandiosity is seeing that you are connected to something bigger than yourself and being overwhelmed, like, holy cow, how am I going to do all this? It's humbling. And you don't want to go out and show people like your gift or your magic. You just want to crawl into a hole because it's just too much, right? So all of these circumambulations, where the initial suppression of Talos puts you in, like the first suppression, put Daedalus into exile. That's how he got to Crete, right? And while in exile, you use your skills to stuff down the lost board member even further. And you yourself get lost in the labyrinth. And then even after you get out, there's inflation versus grandiosity. You take the path of inflation, and even not wanting to suppress Icarus, you lose this other emerging part. Right? So this Talos, Minotaur, Icarus are all the same, emerging inner masculine, trying to get out. And each time it's like foiled. Is it a failure? I mean, linearly, you could call them 3 failures in a row. Or is it a circumambulation? The Talos version didn't work. The Minotaur version didn't work. The Icarus version didn't work. And yet the Labyrinth is at the center of it, saying basically, this is, this is life. This is how it works. You'll keep polishing until it becomes clear. Right? You even have this kind of meta dimension of the Labyrinth. So traditionally, the Labyrinth is underground. So you would think physically, geophysically, right? There's the island of Crete, and then there's the Labyrinth, which is underground. And Daedalus was chucked into the Labyrinth for his punishment by Minos. And yet, while he's in the Labyrinth, he has access to feathers. He can jump off a cliff with his wings and fly to the mainland. So did he escape the Labyrinth and then he's escaping Crete? Mythopoetically, the way I read that is that it implies that all of Crete is the Labyrinth. In other words, this is not a place you go to. This is where you are. This is the archetype and symbol of your life. Your existence is a labyrinth, which is why you're twisting and turning in it. Because gnash your teeth, rail at the gods, complain all you want, but where else are you going to go? Right? I mean, this is why it's this sort of, once you see it at this 30,000 foot level, you realize, well, I may as well go interview my lost board member and go talk to the Minotaur. Even after he stabs me, I'm like, okay, you killed me. I'm dead. You got me. Good one, good one. But it's a dream. So like, hang on, dude, don't leave yet. Come back. I brought you some donuts, by the way. I heard you like donuts. Can we talk? Right? Because we're not going anywhere without you with us. But because this part of you that you stuff down, it's inside of you. It's a part of you. Even your liver, if you wanted, you could cut it. I mean, you would die instantly, but you could cut it out. This Minotaur part of you, it is a part of you. You can't even physically cut it out. You can suppress it with pills, with alcohol, with distraction. But at the end of the day, no matter how you build the labyrinth, it's still there with you on the island of yourself. So at the end of the day, it's like, where are you going to go? You're going to run from it? Where are you going to run? And so finally, the healing stuff that we do, but there are many ways of doing this. You go back and you're like, all right, well, for crying out loud, all right, well, how do we do this then? Okay, and even that is part of the labyrinth. And like most parts of the labyrinth is terrifying. It is terrifying. It is terrifying. So as you listen to the story, and as Gowrie tells it, versus as you heard it as a school child, and then now me within the same hour, telling it over again and giving you my color commentary, we are retelling it in different forms over and over again. This is the visceral feeling of what we described about the power of narrative. Okay. Now, what, an hour 20 into the session, we are deep in the labyrinth now, which is why we are very careful to form sacred space at the beginning of this session. What is the clue then that gets us out of the labyrinth? Right, Gowrie hinted in the beginning about the secret of getting out of the labyrinth, right? That Ariadne sort of asked for and got out of Daedalus, because she's the princess, she's the daughter of the king. If she asks him, he has to tell her. And he told her the secret of how to get out, and that's how she helped Theseus get out. And mythopoetically, what she gave him was a ball of golden thread that he unspooled as he went in and was able to get himself back out. Okay. And literally, this ball of thread, golden thread, in Old English was called a clue, C-L-E-W. And it is where we get our modern day word clue, C-L-U-E, like get a clue. Okay. This ball of golden thread is the clue given by the inner feminine, Ariadne, who is the holder of vision, right? She's basically a muse figure here, right? Which makes his abandonment of her all the more sort of anguished when he strands her on the island. There are different versions. One version, Dionysus, the god Dionysus, comes to him and says, "I want her for my wife. Leave her there," and then she rules as, you know, the wife of Dionysus afterwards. But even the fact that she, in one version, she's the wife of Dionysus, even as a mortal, tells you the power of this inner feminine. As your muse, who loves you and helps you, and then you turn around and betray, right? As any honest artist will tell you, we all betray our muses several times. We circumambulate in our betrayal of our muses several times, over and over. So what is this golden thread? So this comes back to sessions we did over a year ago now. And if you remember those sessions, my quick answer is this golden thread is your bliss. It is your meaning and purpose in life. For me, let's say in my past life when I was a tech CEO, right? So is tech my bliss or my prestige? Right? It's a bit of both. It's maybe 10% bliss, 90% prestige. When I then finally, like, kicking and screaming by the muse, started to follow my golden thread of healing, it got me out of that labyrinth of tech and into the labyrinth of healing, which, you know, in this life of doing what I do, I'm in my bliss every day. And so this golden thread image brings me back, of course, to the poem I read, I think in like the first or second or third live sacred space session back in like probably April of 2020. This poem by William Stafford. Gary will give you a link to that talk where I read the poem the first time in my explanation. But now I want to, in honor of Bill Stafford, I want to circumambulate back to that same poem and give that poem to you here again. And by way of, I mean, there are a lot of new people here, so many of you, even if you were there, you probably forgot it. But basically, one of the things Bill Stafford described was that when you wake up in the morning, right, a golden thread is presented to you, and it leads down into the dark, waters of your dream side. You can think of this in any number. You had a dream, you wake up, the golden thread connecting you to the dream is still there. But if you get up within 30 seconds, it all evaporates. You forget the dream. Not just that, any inspiration, any intuition that comes to you, it's golden. It is the thread of your life, right? But it's super delicate, like gossamer. With a shrug, you can break it. But this golden thread you get every morning is the thread of the clue. It is the way forward in the labyrinth. Okay. And so for him, this wasn't just imagery. For him, this gave him solid guidance as to how to live his life, because he's a poet. So he made the decision very on in his career to, this took different forms throughout his career, but basically the idea was he would not get out of bed in the morning until he had written the poem. Because he's like, when you wake up, that's when you have the golden thread. And I mean, I'm a poet, so my entire life is around this golden thread. And the minute I get up to brush my teeth or read the morning paper, I'm going to break this thing. So very practically, on very concrete terms, that means every morning when I wake up, I will follow the golden thread right off the starting blocks and write a poem. And then I will get out of bed. And I will not get out of bed until I write a poem, because this poem is the whole point of my day. Everything else is just the pit crew in support of this poem. So every morning he wrote a poem. I forgot the exact numbers, but over his lifetime, he published something like 6,000 poems across all those books, right? But his personal notebooks that are like filed somewhere in some library dedicated to him now had something like 20 or 30,000 poems, right? Some kind of like 1 to 10 ratio. And just this brilliant manifestation expression of the muse in action, right? And taken in the hands of a master craftsman artisan like William Stafford. And so to close my notes here, I will read you the poem. One of the poems where he mentions this thread. And the name of this poem is The Way It Is. It is by William Stafford. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You never let go of the thread. That's it. So that's how you get out of the labyrinth. Poor old Daedalus gets in the labyrinth by suppressing his talents and allowing his skills to be misused by the elements of fear, by the elements of threat and control, King Minos. And he again falls back by inflation. He's off the island. He got off, but he lost himself again. Icarus is just another Talos. But the way out, his whole circumambulation, is basically what he told Ariadne. He followed his thread. He did follow his golden thread in part, even when he was doing it for the wrong reason. He is a craftsman. He's a master builder. And all throughout the story, he built. Even the cow for Pasiphae, he built. Right? Maybe for the wrong reason, maybe in a stupid way, maybe in a way where he lost his own son, but he always built. One of the most touching things about Bill Stafford was in an interview, some hapless interviewer was like, "So you write a poem every morning?" He's like, "Yeah, that's right." And he's like he's some kind of, I mean, he's just an award-winning poet. He's very well known, right? Award-winning poet. And the interviewer was like, "Well, I mean, if you write a poem every morning, what happens if you write a bad poem?" Right? And Bill just like looked at them like he was like, had 3 heads. He was like the biggest idiot in the world. And then he tried to explain, basically, it's like, it doesn't matter if the poem is good, right? You follow the thread. And the most badass artists follow the thread, come what may. Right? This thread is the thing. That is the meaning and purpose of my life, not the prestige that may or may not come with it. Right? Not the friendships, not the cool people I may meet along the way. I mean, let me read that part again. Right? While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. So you follow your golden thread, your craft, no matter what. Making the cow, the labyrinth, the wings, even for the wrong reason. And when you look at the end of the story of just the Daedalus part versus the beginning, in the end, he did end up dying of old age. The king of Sicily protected him, right? And so this dying of old age in classical Greek is this symbol, this archetype of like, if you get to die of old age, I mean, there are different degrees of doing it well. You've made it, right? You've survived. Achilles, of course, right? The exception that basically makes the rule, right? But in the end, he makes it all the way to the finish line. even through all these sort of gut-wrenching circumambulations where, you know, he betrays himself basically over and over again. But he continues hanging onto the thread and ultimately makes it, right? And this is a very seasoned kind of sense of making it, filled with gravitas and grief, because grief and loss are part of this labyrinth as well, because they're part of life. So he makes it in the end, but it's not the sort of new age, oh, rainbows and unicorns, everything's fine, and we're above everyone else. It's like he's very much in the pit at the end, but he completes his cycle, right? And he has never let go of his craft, even when he's used it for the wrong reasons. Okay, so those are the notes I have for this circumambulation. Gary, you want to come back up and add whatever you would like to add? Hello.
Hi, Artie. Thank you. I was thinking about, the various phases of Daedalus's life, and as you talked about circumambulation, I was thinking that he moves from Athens to Crete and Crete to Sicily, and at each phase, he's kind of first phase, he's exiled to Crete. He's practically a prisoner in Crete, right? He can't leave Crete. And then he exiles himself to Sicily. And he can't leave Sicily because, he'll then be captured and brought back to Crete. So in all these phases, it's really like he's imprisoned in the labyrinth. And yet he's also continually following the golden thread, like you said. He's practicing his craft, he's following his bliss, he's inventing things, he's making things, all brilliant things which are talked about, for thousands of years later.
Yeah, millenniums.
And so it's like the interweaving of his circumambulation, the labyrinth, as well as him following the golden thread, in itself is a kind of a circumambulation, right? It's almost like falling into the labyrinth and then coming out of it, up and down, is also its own form of circumambulation. So what I'm thinking is that even following the golden thread, is that even a choice?
So you're asking, is following your golden thread even a choice?
Yeah. Because that's what this pattern seems to say, right? This is an archetype of Daedalus that says, he keeps falling down and he keeps flying up, and he keeps, sort of vacillating between two things. It's almost like one thing pushes him into the other phase and the other phase pushes him back into the labyrinth. So it's like keeps going back and forth.
I love that question. Thank you for asking it. I guess my take is just that, I mean, for me, you always have a choice. So if you feel you have this golden thread, let's keep it simple, of talent early in life, right? You end up stuffing it down in one way or another. I mean, that's just part of the typical pattern, right? So let's say I'm an incredible musician early in life. And I grew up in a family of bankers, right? And they're like, well, you can have that as a hobby, but this family produces bankers, maybe the occasional lawyer. We don't produce violinists. You could do that, but you're the eldest son, so you really don't have a choice. Right? So you end up stuffing it down. That's the classic, almost cliche. But let's say you're a violinist, right? And you are born into a family of violinists. And they're like, you're fabulous, you have the art that we all have. Thank goodness. Thank God you're not a banker, right? But now you will follow your path as a professional musician in this way. and you will do the same thing that we've all done. So even though you may still be a musician and a violinist, you've still stuck down a part of it. Because a part of you may be like, I'm going to do jazz violin. I'm going to do EDM violin. And everyone around you is looking at that's not a thing, right? So there's always something, typically, where there's a mask that's being put on you. And in many ways, the masks that just force you to push down music altogether are the more brute force ones. No less effective, right? But the even deeper, almost nuanced, hidden poison versions of the masks are the ones where on the outward, they're like, yeah, you go do it. But then the poison pill is like, and we expect you obviously to do it in this way. And you're like, well, yeah, I'm already getting to be a musician. Fabulous. I'm not like my poor classmate who was born into a family of bankers and had to be disowned to come be my classmate at music school, right? So the trauma I'm suffering is not as bad as anyone else's. So I just dismiss it as a trauma. And that becomes your minotaur. And when it's that subtle, it's very hard to identify. It's very hard to identify because you don't even feel the pain of it. You're like, the labyrinth you're using to stuff down is like, yeah, I had some challenges in my childhood, but it wasn't that bad. I mean, look at the world around you. It's like I could be a refugee somewhere. So I will stop complaining and shut the hell up and get on with it. And is that the end of the world? No, I mean, there are bad things happening in the world, and you are lucky to be where you are. But I'm not talking about this in terms of a comparative thing. I'm not talking about this. I'm not saying be ungrateful. But when we are talking about, like, when you read a story like this is like, do I have a minotaur that I am suppressing again and again and again? Right? I'm not asking you if it's worse than anybody else's. Right? That's just a turn of phrase of the lawyer of King Minos trying to convince you, Daedalus, to like it's not that bad. I'm not asking you to make a war machine, to make war on your people, to make war on Athens. I could. I'm just asking you to make a labyrinth. You love it. The thing you're already doodling that you want to build, I will fund it. But you have to design it to make sure the Minotaur doesn't get out. And you're like, I don't know, who is the Minotaur to me? I don't know. I never met him. You're like, whatever. I'm getting paid, And so, again, especially here in sacred space, it's a story seen through a certain lens, and then a question it evokes. But there is no fear, threat, and control. You don't have to ask the question. Right? Earlier, someone was like, well, but you are kind of like recommending your healing. And it's like, actually, I'm really not. Because if you were to go down and find your Minotaur and interview it with the healing style that we do, there's no guarantee of anything. Right? It's not a cure. Right? None of this is medical. It's just mythopoetics, nerd, healer, sort of general advising at best. Right? Fantasy storytelling is probably closer to what it is. There's no recommendation at all. If anything, it's a warning. Because it's like, what I can guarantee you, if you actually think about finding your Minotaur and actually, heaven forbid, go down and with a box of donuts and a sword, to say, hey, can we talk? I know it's been a while. It's been 30 years, but I was in this LSS session and I wanted to just come check in. But that's terrifying. And so, and who knows how it will go, right? So there is no there is no fear. If anything, there's fear, threat, and control for you to, not do the healing. Yeah. Say. What?
So, no, I was kind of when I began doing healing with you, I remember noticing how you'd be very, very careful to phrase your advice in a way where you'd say, okay, this is the general map of things. If you take this direction and go in this way, this is what's likely to happen. But also in the whole map, you would be careful to put in that, and this is in no way trying to tell you to go there. You can if you want to, but then if you'd rather not, I think everything's fine. So I mean, back in those days, I don't think we realized it was the kind of sacred space definition of saying do it only if you want to, and there's no threat and there's no fear, no rush, no control. But I also understood much later where you say that this is how the healing path is if you choose to take it, but not choosing to take it is a-okay, because it is painful, and and if you want to save yourself from that pain for a little while and stall the healing, it's understandable. Yeah. So there's no kind of finger wagging saying, oh, you're not healing, then you're not doing what's good for you, right? So it kind of, so you don't have that purchase. It's like this is the map of things. This is generally the pattern of what happens when you enter healing, and if you want to, you can. If you don't want to, and that's perfectly okay too. So it was just reminded of,
and it's painful.
Yes, it is. So there are these questions I think we could take up, which is has come up on Crowdcast here, which is when Daedalus makes it to Sicily, has he escaped the labyrinth because now he has someone else to slay the inner masculine?
Well, I mean, I think so. When you see death in a dream, it is a symbol of transformation.
Yeah.
Right. So when you see King Minos die, it is that prestige, hubristic, masculine authority, power in you, dying and transforming into the King of Sicily.
Right.
Right. That's how I would read that mythopoetically. Because you've just gone from Crete to Sicily. You traded one island for another. You traded one authority, inner masculine power for another. So is he the slave of the King of Sicily? No, he's a resident. Right. So it's more benign. He's making all these cool things. Is he freer? Yes. Is he still working for? I mean, you can do the whole analysis, right? But here, symbolically, it's that it's all one inner masculine, right? So if the tadpole of Minos or the caterpillar of Minos dies, and you see this King of Sicily emerge on the other end, you say, did the butterfly kill the caterpillar? I mean, in a manner of speaking, yes, it did. Yes, it did. But in these stories, I mean, this killing of one and then transforming into another becomes this kind of mythopoetic mechanism for signaling transformation. Because it's like it's interesting that when you say Talos also invented the compass in this tradition, and loss of direction. I mean, if you want to characterize Daedalus in any, I mean, one of the key things that comes to mind is that he is truly lost. Just like Minos, he has the gift of the golden bull, which is like a stand-in for the gifts of talent, the Daedalus gifts of like artistry, right? And you get it, and you know what you're supposed to do with it, and yet you don't because of money and prestige, which basically is you don't because of fear. Right. Fear and greed are hand in hand, right? They're basically the same thing. So you got it. You feel in your body what you're supposed to do with it, and yet you stuff it down and take a different path. And that's what happens here. It's not like, oh, you better like be a starving artist and not want money and prestige. That's just another form of stuffing down. Something always gets stuffed down one way or another. And then the curse or blessing of being human is that over the course of a certain period of your life, you like grapple with that and you work through it. Right? We're like, all of the masculine figures are different aspects of the one inner masculine within you. The King of Sicily is a part of you too. Right? Just as the King of Crete is a part of you. And all of these parts within you are like vying with each other. It's like a knife fight in a phone booth, right? But it doesn't have to be. And then, not to pitch healing or whatever, it's like, it doesn't have to be contentious. It can be collaborative. It can be collaborative. And still, it will still be terrifying. There's no escape from the abject terror of like going in and talking to your like minotaur, right?
Yeah. And the next question is, was killing Talos, his nephew, following his golden thread?
I mean, I don't know. I think it's just I mean, Talos was clearly a holder of the golden thread. It is an aspect of your golden thread that you then suppress and then transform. So killing something, it comes back in another form. So Theseus came in and killed the Minotaur, and you're like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be talking to the Minotaur, making friends with it, making up so that it fights for you, right? It's like Game of Thrones. It's like the dragons are on your side, are on your army, right? And you're like winning because you reclaim the dragons, right? Can you imagine if you had Minotaur like all cool and healed and not pissed anymore and fighting on your army, right? That would be unbelievable. But in certain sort of mythopoetic traditions, like Theseus kills the Minotaur, right, and transforms it into something else, right? Because Theseus is also an aspect of your inner masculine, right? He is one stroke of the knife fight in the phone booth, right? But the Minotaur never goes away. Like Talos doesn't go away; he comes back as a Minotaur, and then they come back, you could say, as Icarus. Right? It's like the same damn thing happening again and again and again. And even seeing the pattern that you've made, like with the relationship example, right? It's like you look back and you realize I've done the same damn thing from my own wound and weakness for the past 4 relationships. Right? Let alone going back and trying to recover those parts of myself, because if I date women, every woman I am involved with in my life, as sort of sisters, friends, daughters, aunties, they're all aspects, reflections of my own inner feminine, right? That's why I see them in the outer world. The outer reflects the inner. So forget about going in and even doing anything, reconciling it. Even just the act of looking back. I mean, think about your last 3 or 4 relationships that you've been in. Even the act of looking back and seeing how you may have done the same thing over and over again, just seeing the pattern of the labyrinth is itself triggering and painful. Right? It's like we want to just move on. So yeah, it was killing his nephew, following the golden. It was maybe suppressing it, and then it comes back in a different form. It is, let's say like turn 30 or whatever. It's like, you kill the nephew, you go back, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going backwards now. And then you go forward again in an older arc. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing great. I'm healed. I'm done. I'm the king of the world. Hooray. Oh no, I go back again. Right? It's that kind of feeling. And while you're in it, you're like, this will never end. This will never get better. right? But when you zoom out to the 30,000 foot level, you're like, oh yeah, I'm here. I've got a long way to go. And till I even reach here, and what's waiting for me here is like also terrifying. So yeah, if you take that as a recommendation in sacred space, then I guess you do.
Yeah. So, would you also like to talk a bit about grandiosity? Because I think there's a question here is, someone said, I feel like that's me now. And what is a possible way to come through this? The idea of grandiosity.
Well, I mean, that's okay. So that's a huge topic. I guess what can I say about that in a few minutes? I would say, so grandiosity and inflation are kind of two sides of a coin, right? Inflation is me focused. Grandiosity is greater other focused. Okay. And it can often be a fine line, right? It can often be a fine line. So for instance, people will throw around the term guru, right? And they'll say, oh no, we just mean teacher. But as you know, right, in Indian culture, where the word comes from, guru is a very specific term. And my understanding of it is in many traditions, if a person is your guru, you have to obey that person without question. And the reason is the guru, when he or she accepts you, is actually taking moral responsibility for you achieving your path. Which is a devastating thing to consider. Like you're taking responsibility for those other human beings, like spiritual achievement and development. And that's why you have to, sort of completely submit. And for me, as a Westerner and American, that's nuts. I'm like, that's nuts. I'll go around and rebirth, whatever, but nobody's doing that to me. Right? And if I get stuck in unenlightened, so be it. Right? And so that's why, like, the words you use are very careful. So I'm an advisor. I'm not a guru. I'm not even a teacher. Right? And people who work with me are my advisees. Right? So the archetype I always use is, you are the golfer, I'm the caddy. Right? I am in deference to you. I'm in service to you. Now we're playing this golf course that you are, pretending to be unfamiliar with, right? So, and I caddy here all day long, so I can tell you, the green on hole 9 breaks a little to the left, even though it doesn't look like it. You can take it or leave it, right? And whatever score you get, it doesn't make any difference to me, because it's your name on the scorecard. Right? I'm here to help you. I work for tips. Right? I work for tips. So, so that's the archetype that's more comfortable for me. And so the fine line is grandiosity becomes like me, right? I'm the guru, and if I'm an American guru or a Western guru, I'm not taking responsibility for anything, because you don't know that that's what I'm supposed to do. So I'm taking all of the power and whatever and not really giving you anything. And you can tell it's a fine line, but you can tell because in those situations, you can cut the fear, threat, and control in the air with a knife. Right? It's not sacred at all. They'll be, oh, it's sacred. Look at my outfit. Look at all the people around me worshiping me. Right? But the minute you feel threat, it's like, it's not sacred. And the beauty of a little online thing like this is you start to get the flavor of the sacred. And so when something doesn't taste sacred to you, my advice, my recommendation, right, is to run. Just walk the other way. Because life's too short. Or it's like, if you're going to threaten me, at least, it's like, let it be a poker game or a contract negotiation, right? It's like, we're in the market, we're threatening each other. I'm haggling over goats, right? At least I get to make money and whatever, right? If you're going to threaten me, you're going to threaten me like for free. And on the grandiosity side, it is more this surrender. So bliss is a choice, but as we talk about when we teach bliss, it's like it's a choice, it's a choice, it's a choice. But when it tips past a certain tipping point, it kind of accelerates. So we say like once you're at like 20% of your time, in a way we define it, of bliss, getting to 20, it can be slow, controlled. You could stay at 5% and have a fantastic life. Once you tip past 20, it tends to like accelerate to 99, like that. And if you know that accelerating to 99 will like blow up parts of your life, then don't do it. Or you can choose. Right? But the warning we give when we teach bliss is like, no, 20% is typically the tipping point. So if you don't want that to happen, stay at 10, like use a time logger, and don't do your bliss more than 10% of the time, because it will tip. And it's always a choice. It's a choice to tip. It's a choice to like, just let yourself be swept in, right? But after a while, it becomes not a choice. Because you're like in the river, and I mean it's always, you can still pull yourself out of the river, but it's like so hard to do, and you're having kind of such a good time that you don't care, right? Like I have all these programs that I'm still going to launch, and it's like, there's a bit of marketing calculus. I'm like, what do people want? What time of year is it? But at a high level, it doesn't matter, because it's like these are part of what's coming out of me. It's like a painter. I'm going to paint these things even if nobody buys them, because they're just coming out of me, right? There's not really much choice anymore. And so being overwhelmed by the bigness, the muse, as we talk about her, is kind of the reducing valve, like the sort of titrator, if you will. So that's one way to think about it. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on, just in sort of answering this question, is that even so with inflation, there's this sort of association with like scoundrelness and like, scandal and like being a jerk and taking advantage of people. But even with grandiosity, there is a very old idea that like there is an aspect of despicability that comes with grandiosity. Okay. Not that you mean to be despicable, right? But despicability will happen even on the grandiosity side. Because when you're following a path like this, and the world expects you to go like this, up and to the right, sometimes your path will cross here, and then will happen to cross here. And then the linear world will say, aha, two dots, I draw a straight line, and hooray. But then you'll get off the line because you're following this, you're not following this. So sometimes you will be in compliance with the template of people's expectations, and sometimes you will not. And sometimes you will not be in, you will leave relationships when everyone's like, what the hell are you doing? You'll leave jobs and career paths when everyone's like, what the hell are you doing? You worked 15 years to make partner, and now you're leaving to do like what again? Right? You're going to be like a body worker, healer. It's not like a masseuse. Like, what is that? Right? You're going to be a painter. And so there's this aspect of what ends up being called despicability that happens because the path you're taking is completely orthogonal to the path to the template that others are expecting you to take. And even you yourself are expecting to take, because that's what you signed up for in the beginning. But then as your bliss came up more and more, you're like, that's the choice. Do I follow this as it's leading me, as the golden thread is leading me every morning, leading to me to be changeable, which is a polite word. It's more like flaky, unreliable, despicable. That is the choice you are faced with every day, every morning when you wake up. And part of it is the enormity of the bigness of the thing you're plugged into. It's amazing that it can even hold back as much as it does. It's like an elephant can like touch you and not crush you because it can feel through its foot like what's too much. It's like highly sensitive for something so big. It's almost more sensitive than we are because it doesn't destroy in the way we do, right? And so it's a marvel that the bigness that you're plugged into can even be so gentle and delicate. But when you're like going on the sort of roller coaster of this, you can be forgiven for thinking, oh my gosh, the gods are punishing me and I can't believe I have to deal with this. I should have just been a banker or a lawyer like everybody told me to do. And it's okay to do that. It's so for me, the way that is the critical thing, like, so for me as a teacher, right, the most important thing is that the advisee's sovereignty is always sacrosanct, right? People always like, oh, Artie, you know, you're this healing, tell me what to do. Like, I'm in this situation and like, I have no idea what you're supposed to do. Like, I can give you a map and say, well, these are the exercises I would do if you want, only if you want, to find out what the hell you're actually supposed to do. But if you get the answer, you come back and you ask me, is this right? It's like, I don't know. Like, I'm not your guru. I was like, I have no responsibility. I was like, I can teach you like maps and exercises and meditations, but it's like, you are the sovereign of your life, not me. And by the way, if you ask my opinion, not anybody else. Not your parents, not your spouse, not society, not any deity. You are the sovereign creator of your life. And if you say, no, I'm not, I'm a slave, you have to choose that. You have to decide that. Right? You're like, no, this deity is the all-powerful. It's like, yeah, you chose that.
Yeah.
Right? If you read the sacred book and saw like bad words in it, you're like, oh, this is, and you walk away, it's like, the giveaway is that you have the power to like devote 100% and say this is all powerful, or to walk away. That's the giveaway, that you are the sovereign. And for me, at least, because I love that part of human beings, I'm pushing all of that back to the person always. Because then it's just faster. It makes my job easier, right? The faster you realize your sovereignty, the more you're like, all right, I mean, are we locking and loading and going or not? I don't know. Because after a while, you're like, I see all the patterns now. And it's like, how many more years do I have on this earth? What's okay? Well, let's just go. Let's just do it. You know, what else are we gonna do? And that comes from this like realizing your sovereignty in a way, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful to be a fly, be a caddy. You know, when someone like hits that ball and it just like flies perfectly. It's gorgeous. It's blissful.
Thank you. On that note, what reflection do you have for us this month?
Okay, so let's rush through this because we are over time. I apologize, everyone. Thank you for the questions. Okay, so the exercise, and again, principle 4, no expectation of participation. You don't have to do this. It's totally up to you. But at the end of these sessions, I typically give a little suggested exercise to like check it out. And the way you would do this is you would just be alone in a room by yourself for like 10 or 15 minutes, or in your car. So you would drive out to groceries, park the car before you go in to shop, sit in the car for 10 minutes and write your answers to these questions. I recommend you write them out and not just think about them because they get slippery in your mind, right? It's a labyrinth in your mind. So writing it out, things have to stop moving because you've written them down, right? So you can like at least look at it on the page. And so the questions for reflection here are, given this whole Daedalus story and everything, and circumambulation, what labyrinth are you in right now? Do you feel in any part of your life that you are trapped and going in circles, seemingly going in circles? Is there, like Talos and Minotaur and Icarus, what is the wound you keep revisiting over and over and keep making the same left turn, stuffing that part of you down, right? Like each time it's a little different, but each time I'm basically doing the same damn thing, right? As Loki asked Thor, right, in the Avengers, like, will you ever not fall for that trick? And then in the face of all that, what is your golden thread? Because the way to, if you assume you wanted to stop going around in circles or seemingly going in circles, the way you would do that is not to like be a better person and like heal my wound and do all this stuff. It's the ultimate is your golden thread. So what is your golden, what is your bliss? When you hear me read the poem in the replay or whatever, right, about the thread you follow, when I say there's a thread you follow, and at the end, when I say you never let go of the thread, what comes to mind for you? What is your thread? Just a bit of a pro tip. If something comes to you, flashes in your mind when I say that, and you're like, ah, that can't possibly it, then that's it. Right? When you say, no, that's stupid. That's you throwing Talos off the rock and locking Minotaur in the labyrinth. Now, you don't have to go get him, but I'm like, when you're like, I don't know what it is, I'm like, did anything pop in your mind? Anything? And people will be like, well, there was this one thing, but that's stupid. And I'm like, only if you want, that's where I would go. That's where I would go. That's the Talos one will typically be stuffing down. The thing you are like meant to do, but are terrified of doing because it will cost you. It will cost you prestige. It will cause you uncertainty. It will cause you raised elbows, raised eyebrows at Thanksgiving family reunion, right? And you're like, there's got to be an easier way. Yeah, so that's the exercise. That's the exercise. All right, so we are a bit over time. I apologize for that. Now I'll go ahead and close the session. So our next session is next month. And I will just put the link up here for people to join, only if you want, as you would like. Put it up on Facebook too. It's free, open to the public as this one, and feel free to send and invite your friends if you would like, only if you want. And with that, I will go ahead and close this session by saying that I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space together. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others, deep in your sovereignty. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Happy Sunday.